talk about the importance of like living with different teachers. And I'm curious if you would speak to, you've lived in many different monasteries, both in Thailand and in the West. And I'm curious if you could talk about, on the one hand, similarities and differences between living in monasteries in Thailand versus Europe. And also, even within Europe, what are the advantages of actually trying out a monastic life in different settings and seeing how things exist in multiple settings versus just a single monastery. I mean, the Christian monastic ideal of stability. Basically, you stay at one monastery for your whole monastic life. What are the advantages of not doing that, of seeing variety?
Yes, that's an important kind of aspect because I noticed here in the West there's a fairly limited number of training environments, places where one can start one's monastic life. Say in America, it used to be just one place, long waiting list, and there's more. But it's certainly compared to Thailand or any Buddhist country where there's just so much that you can choose from, and you would naturally just have a lot more contact with other monks, visiting other monasteries. But here in the West, sometimes it can feel really quite isolated, quite cut off from the rest of the kind of the monastic world. We are often just living with really a small group of people. So it's it's become even recommended practice in our monasteries in the West to give people that chance to explore other monastic settings, before they say take the bhikkhu ordination, and then later sending people away for like a third or fourth year to go to another monastery or go to Thailand. That's really useful, and because it's normal that various ajahns and teachers will have a particular emphasis, and this is something you see right in the early sutta text, like how the different disciples of the Buddha would have different characteristics, different strengths. And say Sariputta and Moggallana, they would sort of train the disciples in different ways, and then one would start maybe learning with one and then carry on with another. So we have that disciple and mentor relationship mentioned in the Vinaya. So it's important that living teacher-disciple contact and relationship is important. One can learn things that one wouldn't be able to learn just from a book. But having enough choice and variety is another aspect which can be a bit limited, especially in our culture in the West. It's just the practicality of it. There's just not so many places, not so many maybe teachers to go around. But for myself, I found it very insightful. I've spent I try to count, but I think in the first 20 years of living as a bhikkhu, I've lived in more than 10 monastic settings for a good amount of time, like at least 3 months at a time. So I was able to experience a good number of different settings and learn different things from different teachers, and just observing the way the places are run, what is emphasized here, emphasized there. And I would recommend that to others too, because again, one can learn one particular way to live as a monk in one monastery, and then just make the assumptions, this is the way it's done correctly, or this is the only way that in this tradition one is supposed to practice, when in fact for someone else other things were more important and more useful.
Ajahn, that's quite useful, I think, for people to hear about the usefulness in seeing variety of practice. I'm curious if you could also speak to kind of the the balancing aspect of that, of this Nisaya period. So actually there is a period which the Buddha encouraged for young monks to stay in one place, for 5 years, stay with your teacher for your first 5 years. And that does exist in Theravada Buddhism in the earliest traditions, and is still practiced in the Ajahn Chah tradition. And I'm curious if you could speak to that, because oftentimes if you're a young romantic Westerner, you read the suttas like the Rhinoceros Sutta about wander alone like a rhinoceros. If you don't find somebody who's equal or better, then just stay alone and practice alone, and you should continually be camping and living tudong or dutanga, taking on these harsh practices. And then someone who comes from that mind state comes to one of these stable monasteries and they see all the faults, like, oh, look at these luxurious monks, they've got all these advantages, where the true practice is living out in the forest, and they don't realize that they're just following their own biases, and don't realize how their aversion is kind of cropping up and skewing their view on life. And you, having lived in these international monasteries where you're living with people from different countries, where this possibility for misunderstanding is even more pronounced, maybe if you could talk to one, this aspect of stability as it exists and the usefulness of that, but also of kind of working through how do you nurture a sense of shared understanding and cohesion in a difficult environment where people are coming from different cultures with different ideals and different ideas, and the value of that. It would be so easy for someone who doesn't like one of these monasteries. You go to a monastery, and this has implications for non-monastics as well. You go to a new working environment or a new friend group, and you start seeing all the faults, and you're like, oh, I see the faults, so I should just run away and find a better environment. But what are the advantages of staying in one place, and then when you're there, creating cohesion?
Yeah, there is even that one sutta where the Buddha talks about like the advantages and disadvantages of either staying too long in one place or just wandering without stop. And one of the things that happen, he says, is if you just keep wandering from place to place, you never develop kind of strong friendships with people or relationships that last. So that would be one thing, by being kind of forced to be living in the same place with a small group of people, you really get to know them well, and then often based on that, maybe initially you didn't get along with them, but later, like a year or two later, you actually learn how to get along with this person. You have to develop a lot of just like acceptance that people are different, and equanimity. You can't just follow your likes and dislikes that much. You have to put up with just the differences in people's behavior. But based on that creates that sense of cohesion. And I think that is the strength of the Ajahn Chah monasteries in particular, that because people, the monastics were kind of forced to live together for years, sometimes either in the early days in Thailand and then in the West, and work together, they form these kind of relationships that last a lifetime, and it creates a homogeneous group. I mean, there are differences within the group, the individual points of view, but it's cohesive enough to actually function as a group, and that's what creates that same sense of a Sangha that can actually work together as a Sangha. That means, among other things, to perform Sangha Kamma, which means the formal acts of the Sangha, such as performing ordinations and dealing with various Sangha business together as a group. And you don't see that in any other group, really. There's individual monks and nuns here and there in the West kind of doing their individual things, but it really seems to be only those that are cohesive enough to form this particular group that come together for things like Sangha Kamma and have some regular meetings. The Buddha did encourage the monks to come together and make sort of group decisions on on Sangha business together, to listen to experienced monks, and so these relationships naturally develop within that group, and the cohesiveness arises within that group. Although there is that initial resistance to it, and I had it too. I experienced this sort of resistance to having to live with people that maybe didn't have the same approach as me. I came into the Sangha with quite a strong background already in like knowing about Buddhist teachings, Pali, and all that, whereas most of my peers that were there at the same time had very different approach. Maybe didn't really know that much about Buddhism in particular. They were there more for the just looking for a spiritual community, a place to do some meditation maybe, but and it was interesting then to see how the individuals developed over time. Some of them maybe developed a deeper interest in Buddhism later on and stayed, but many of them kind of dropped off and were looking elsewhere after some time. But this relationship, I think we can't really do without it. That the Nisaya relationship is something that is necessary.
Yeah, thank you, Ajahn. I'm curious, this Nisaya relationship has been practiced. Certainly Ajahn Chah practiced it, the Buddha practiced it, encouraged it, and then it has been, brought over by Lumpur Sumedho and other teachers in this tradition. Thinking about the Ajahn Chah lineage as a whole, we had these Western monks from North America and Europe and elsewhere in Asia coming to Thailand. In the first generation of these monks, say like in the late 60s or early 70s, it was a very self-selecting and almost like commando, or literally commando group of young men who were quite strong, and because you had to be very strong to be able to endure life in a forest monastery like Wat Nong Papong or Wat Nanachat in the early days. And now there are, a dozen or so monasteries in the Ajahn Chah lineage around the world, and other kind of Western sanghas kind of cropping up. And I'm curious if you could talk to this generational shift in the sangha and say, where do we go from here? What's the state of this Western sangha, this generational shift? We're now 45 or more years from the establishment of the international monastery in Thailand. Over 40 years of the monasteries in England, over 20, 25 years of monasteries in North America. So what are the challenges? What's the state of this Western Sangha and a broader Western Sangha? And what are the challenges and where do we go from here?
Yeah, this is one question that I asked myself when we were studying, say, the Vinaya texts. We tend to just approach them as some kind of a timeless document, but there was a lot of history. A lot happened even since the time of the early Sangha and the time of the Buddha in India, and then there was a lot of development actually through Buddhist history, and that continues until now, until today. So in a way, we have to take into account where are we in this process, and we are just really coming to the end of like the first generation of the pioneers of this Western monastic lineage. Say Ajahn Sumedho, he will soon have been a monk, nearly 60 years, so he's the oldest one in this particular group. And then the first generation disciples, the abbots of the branch monasteries, they are mostly like in their 70s, maybe late 60s, 70s. So coming on to 80. So there's definitely going to be some effect of that on the whole feeling. So like when the Western monks came in the late 70s, say to England in the 80s, the atmosphere in the monasteries would have been really probably quite different from what it is like today. It was pioneering kind of spirit. I think there was a lot of that kind of volunteering aspect as well. Lots of lay people just spontaneously coming to help, being willing to offer their time and resources to just start some very basic setup in these monasteries. And like nobody really knew much how to do things. Nobody was like a professional at it. It was a lot of just experimentation. But people say when they talk about those days that it was a very very inspiring time. There was like just a lot of good feeling in the air, and it was just the spirit of pioneering something, starting something new. And that's the very nice thing about that. When you start a new tradition and you transplant something onto new soil, then it generates that kind of a lot of goodwill and wanting to help and engage. But then when it's been around for decades, maybe 4 or 5 decades, of course there will be some changes happening. And I remember reading some of these sociologists of religion have written very interesting texts and books about Buddhism. Also, they focused on they described how Buddhist traditions tend to develop and undergo transformation. Say in the theravada countries of Southeast Asia, there is plenty of recorded history. So they pointed out that usually when say after some period of maybe the degeneration of the sasana, maybe things not going so well, there will be like a split of group of monks going to practice in the forest and kind of going back to the original principles that the Buddha established, and going to live strictly and maybe quite in an ascetic way and keep all the Vinaya rules strictly again. And then that group will set up some more permanent places after a while, and the teacher might become quite well known. And then gradually it will start to attract more and more material support from lay people and from maybe the rulers of the country, until there'll be a kind of peak or culmination point. At that point, say that the main monastery will become really well established, and they will start to build like maybe a big meditation hall and or a stupa or something like that, like a monument. And then the teacher will have quite a few disciples, and then maybe these disciples will go and set up their own branch monasteries here and there. The tradition will start to spread. And then the original teacher will die, and his monastery at that point will often become maybe quite big and with a lot of residents, and it will not be as strict as it was originally. Life will generally become more comfortable. There'll be a lot of requisites and support from the laity. It'll become the focus of a lot of faith and devotion of the laity. So the actual strictness of the practice in that original monastery will decline and might turn into a bit of a museum, but still a place of inspiration. Whereas the other younger disciples of the teacher will develop their places, and the cycle will repeat itself usually. So that's how it was observed, in various waves of this, say, the forest tradition in Southeast Asia. There have been these cycles that the tradition has gone through, and gradually there was generally there was a possibility of a revival every now and then. So for us in the West, maybe it will follow a similar pattern, and then after the the first generation will come to the end of their life, then the bigger monasteries might become exactly like that, more kind of comfortable and well endowed, and good places for the laity to go to. But as long as there is the opportunity for the disciples to establish again other offshoots and branches here and there, and develop their say their teaching skills, and also being able to experiment and adapt this way of life of the forest monk. As long as that kind of possibility is there, then the lineage will not lose its freshness and its appeal. So it's important that we have that opportunity for the new generation not to just become the sort of the museum caretakers, so to say, but to be able to experiment and go through these sort of initial hardships and the pioneering time themselves. Otherwise, it could become a little bit stale after a while and lack that possibility of renewal.
Yeah, thank you, Tanajan. And yeah, you read about that. I mean, even in the suttas, this kind of the Buddha talking about these periods of degeneration and then revitalization, and certainly, the social sociology. People studying this in Buddhist contexts, and it reminds me of this Ajahn Man quote, and maybe Luang Por Sao as well. But that in the future, they're saying that forest monks will start living like city monks, and city monks will start living like lay people, and lay people will start living like animals. And he didn't say this, but I mean, these days animals are living like devas. I mean, you got some pretty high-class dogs and cats these days. But and as a junior monk, I remember living at certain monasteries which did have a really fancy meditation hall, or whatever I perceived as a young monk, seeing this meditation hall and really seeing, oh, this is the Dharma ending age. The monks, they eat cheese, and they're flying across the world and doing these kind of things. Or they've got a computer, and then saying something to that effect, to a senior monk, and this monk saying back to me, like, actually, no, I feel like this is, the Dhamma flourishing age. We've got these living teachers. We've got Ajahn Pasano, Luang Por Sumedho, who are, still teaching and living this beautiful way of life and giving this example. And we do have these huts. You don't have to stay around. If you think the main temple is too extravagant, go back to your hut. It's simple and it's in the forest, and you've got this opportunity. And something which the computers make possible is conversations like this. Like, just for people's backgrounds, I've never met Ajahn Gavesako in person. I've known of your name for a long time, and we've had maybe emails or video chats on a number of occasions. But yeah, getting to learn from monastics who are literally living on the other side of the world. I'll have to go in 5 minutes because I've got morning meditation, 5 a.m. meditation, but it's 8 hours later for Ajahn Gavesako in Portugal. So I guess just making the most of the benefits and trying to avoid the pitfalls of technology and the changes, and really trying to keep Buddhism revitalized in one's own practice. Ajahn, would you have any kind of parting words of just perspectives that come up from this conversation, or just that you'd like to share with a wider audience?
Yes, just like you said, the opportunities are there. We have here in the West, in particular. You wonder about the future of civilization and the world. There's all these worrying scenarios, but let's hope that Buddhism can play a positive role in this. And when people in times of crisis have nothing to turn to, that they can find something useful in the Buddhist tradition. So I have that kind of hope for these monasteries in the West, people being able to practice in a Western environment, that they will use them. And even if all kinds of certainties that people have had in their lives are crumbling and people have to give up things, but still, if they can use the Buddhist teachings and meditation to find something inside that's not subject to this dissolution and breaking up, then that's the best we can offer, and I hope people will make use of that. It's a great gift.
Ajahn, yeah, thank you so much, and I would love to talk with you more if people are interested. There are other talks by Ajahn Gavesako on YouTube, and yeah, thank you so much for your time, Ajahn, and I'll turn off the stream now. So yeah, thank you.
Pleasure.